this feels like an injury, that looking at that data, Jerry Jeudy falls in that 20% bucket where he will likely miss 5 to 8 weeks.
When you say 8 weeks, that is honestly just terrifying. We are talking bounce back candidates for fantasy football here in 2023, and I am joined by an awesome guest, brand new Football Guys staffer, Adam Hutchison. He is going to be our medical expert, our injury expert. Anything where a player gets hurt, we are going to Adam. Adam, we have some crazy news here to start out this show. We are recording this on, let me just double check the date here, Tuesday, August 29th at 7:35 p.m. Eastern. And we have the news today that Jonathan Taylor has not been traded from the Indianapolis Colts. This is such a weird situation. This is one of the guys we were going to talk about as a bounce back candidate. Man, okay, so first of all, I want to hear what you have to say on the whole Jonathan Taylor thing, because he was initially going to be traded, and now he's on the PUP list, meaning he will miss 4 games. Where are we at with Jonathan Taylor?
Yeah, I mean, it like you said, it's a weird situation for sure. I mean, I think if we're talking about from an injury perspective, I would have anticipated him to be back. There was a big knock on Jonathan Taylor last year. His efficiency took a big hit, was not the same player that we saw from 2 years prior, obviously. When we look at some of his injury history with the ankle, he had recurrent ankle injuries, multiple ankle injuries, and that one that was really the cherry on top was the high ankle sprain. Of all the injuries that I've looked at, high ankle sprain is definitely the most detrimental to running backs. On average, they see an 18% decrease in their fantasy production rest of season. So from when they have the ankle sprain to the end of the season, on average, fantasy production drops by 18%. That might not sound a lot, but of all the injuries that I've looked at, that is the most I've ever seen. So high ankle sprains are very detrimental. So we almost take those efficiency concerns with Jonathan Taylor and we're going to stuff them away. 2023 is going to be a new season, reset button. Should see the old Jonathan Taylor that fantasy managers are accustomed to. And then we've got this weird thing going on with the contract and the PUP. It's really hard to decipher the injury components of this. You know, is it back, ankle, or are we having contract issues? I don't have a strong injury take right now just because it is such a unique and odd situation. But like you said, we know now he's going to be on the PUP. He has to miss at least the first 4 games of the season.
Yeah, and honestly, I don't think it matters. I don't think it matters if you or I or anyone, the most foremost expert in the world, could come out here with a medical opinion, and it doesn't matter, because this is the point where with Jonathan Taylor, we're not talking about medicine, we're not talking about fantasy football, we're not talking about analytics, data, like none of it. We're just talking about people. This is the weirdest situation in football. You've got an owner of the Indianapolis Colts who is more willing to pay to transport a whale across the country and get it out of captivity than he is to just pay the best player in his football team. Like, it's just such a weird situation that I don't get. I know there's a lot of questions about the PUP, the PUP, the physically unable to perform list. And this was actually an interesting tidbit that we got from Jason Wood, one of the staffers here at Football Guys. And I want to read this for everyone watching, listening. So in order for a player to have an accrued season, and this is important because it lends to Jonathan Taylor becoming a free agent next year. In order for a player to have an accrued season, they must be on a team's roster, injured reserve, or physically unable to perform PUP list for a minimum of 6 games in a season. We already know that right now Jonathan Taylor is going to be on the PUP list for 4 games. Now, it goes on saying, it does not matter if the games are in regular season or postseason. Additionally, a player does not have to be active on game day, as players on the inactive list still get a game credited towards gaining an accrued season. So essentially, if Jonathan Taylor is on the PUP list for the 4 games, and then he is inactive for another 2 games, and he just says, ouch, ouch, my ankle hurts, I'm not playing, he's accrued a full season, and he's going to be a free agent no matter what. And whether we feel like he has no leverage or not, he can kind of do whatever he wants at this point. At least that's the way it seems. I might be totally wrong. I might need to dive a bit more into this, but it really seems like we thought Jonathan Taylor had no leverage, but he kind of does. From everything I'm reading here, it's players on a franchise tag who hold out and never sign their, players on a franchise tag who hold out and never sign their deal are the ones that don't have leverage. However, Taylor is under contract until he's not. So he gets to be a free agent. This is so wild. I don't know about you, Adam. I'm not drafting him until maybe the 7th or 8th round at the earliest. Have you taken a look at where you might be drafting him in fantasy drafts? Is this something where he's totally off the table for you?
No, I mean, I definitely would take a swing at him just because, like I said, from a health perspective, theoretically should be back to the Jonathan Taylor that we were drafted in the first round from a couple of years ago. Um, I haven't dived into the ADP as much as you. I think that sounds about right. I mean, he is somebody that if he's on the field and he is playing, he's going to score you a lot of fantasy football points. He's done that throughout his career. It's just about getting on the football field, right? And that's the big question mark. So if somebody likes to take a chance, sure, yeah, I'd be all for it.
Now, the comparison that I've heard is, well, Alvin Kamara is going to be suspended for 3 games, and I'm perfectly fine taking Alvin Kamara at ADP. This situation is different. Well, not only is it not 3 games, it's 4 games. Two, Alvin Kamara doesn't have a mysterious ankle injury that's potentially lingering or fake or real. We don't know. And there's also just not this same contract situation. So it's interesting. I've already said 7th or 8th round at the earliest, but I read a poll on Twitter and 42% of voters said they just would not draft Jonathan Taylor at all. And that's where we're getting. We're getting into this really weird spot where nobody wants a guy who was the running back 2 years ago because of how uncomfortable this situation has made everybody.
Yeah.
So with these guys, especially someone like, for example, the example you used here was Cooper Kupp. Is there something that you say like, okay, this guy has passed a certain age threshold? Is that something that we don't want to generalize too much? We want to do this on an injury by injury basis, hamstrings for 30-year-olds versus ACLs for 23-year-olds. It's kind of a connect the dots mix and match here. It's not just, oh, he's old and he sprained his ankle, so he's done.
Yeah, I mean, there's been a lot of research and talk about these age curves, age apex, sometimes referred to in the fantasy football community, where we want to find when that player is going to drop off. When we're talking about specific injuries, especially soft tissue injuries like a hamstring strain, yeah, there's a higher injury risk. Important not to get hung up on the details too much. Like, these numbers are arbitrary. It's, everybody's a little bit different. Everyone's skill set's a little bit different. Just because this age production curve says somebody's going to decline at 30 doesn't mean that every single wide receiver is going to hit that decline at the 30 age mark. But when we look at filtering out wide receivers by their skill set, specifically slot wide receivers, that age production curve a little bit farther along, where these wide receivers can have productive seasons age 28, age 29, age 30, even some at age 31. I think Cooper Kupp's skill set is shown of somebody that we could see him transition solely, primarily into slot for his career and extend that arc a little bit. So maybe as he gets older, that ceiling's not as high, but I still think, based on some of those things that I've looked at, Cooper Kupp is somebody that can be productive late in his career.
Well, before we keep going on here, if you've been enjoying this conversation so far, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to the channel. We're going to keep bringing you content all throughout this preseason here. But hey, the NFL season is just 1 week away. And starting next week, this show will be on YouTube. We're talking Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. All right. And then we're bringing you an audio show on Fridays. And we're coming to you live on Sunday mornings, where Adam is going to be joining us to make sure that you guys know everything you need to know about any of your players that might be injured and whether you should be starting or sitting them. So please make sure you subscribe to the channel here, leave a comment, and ask us any questions you want about players that are injured that you're worried about drafting, and we'll get back to you. All right, so Adam, it seems like you're pretty good with Cooper Kupp. There's another guy, a high-profile player here who he's been talked about a lot. And it's a guy that I think everyone was really expecting to not only win Rookie of the Year last year as he was playing, but to come back this year after an injury and really just bounce back no problem. And that's Breece Hall, the running back for the New York Jets. Right now, he's going off the board, according to Football Guys ADP, as the pick number 36, running back 14. So I just have a lot of questions here, but I'm gonna just defer to you on this with Breece Hall, because I have tons of questions on the football side, but on the injury side, how are we feeling about his knee?
So I think there's a lot, especially with the fantasy community, sometimes where we want to sit on the fence and kind of teeter, are we in or out on a guy? And I try to help subscribers and people that follow me online draw a very clear line in the sand and say, hey, I'm drafting this guy at this ADP. I'm not drafting this guy at this ADP. And Breece Hall was really, really close to that uncomfortable spot for me personally earlier this summer when he was going around the mid third, because I did not think it gave him a lot of room. He was basically being drafted at a ceiling. It did not give him a lot of room to grow. When we talk about running backs coming off an ACL year one, rushing attempts per game goes down. Target share per game goes down. Rushing efficiency goes down. And fantasy points per game decreases by 26% that first year back. That is substantial. That's a big hit,
Wow.
especially for somebody like Breece Hall, who's already at the top. For running backs specifically that do well after an ACL, either have a really large workload or they're heavily involved in the passing game. Okay. Those 350, 450 touch backs that we've seen that carry a heavy workload, those quote unquote workhorse backs, those are kind of a thing of the past. We have not seen those recently, at least the last 5 years. I mean, Derrick Henry and maybe Nick Chubb. Otherwise, most guys are in their committee. So for Breece, it was all about receiving game. He profiles as a receiver. We know under Aaron Rodgers, Aaron Jones averaged at least a 13% target share his last 3 seasons in Green Bay. So I was like, okay, if Breece Hall is going to be successful, this is what's going to do it for you. And then Dalvin Cook signed in New York. And that totally wiped away everything. To me, that totally lowered his ceiling. We've seen Breece Hall's ADP drop about a round. He's somebody 5th, 6th round I'd be considering. I think he offers you later in the season. Again, I'm going off on a tangent here a little bit, but this depends on your league format. We see a lot of best ball drafters are talking about Breece Hall. That's different than your typical redraft home league. You want to get off to a fast start in those leagues. And I feel like Breece Hall is somebody that if you're investing a 3rd or 4th round pick and you're not getting that high RB1 production that we are like to if we're picking him at that spot, it puts you in a hole and it potentially leads you to missing your fantasy football playoff. So at that ADP, I've been out, and that's pretty much my stance on that.
Yeah, I want to go over some numbers here for Breece Hall, specifically because of this Nathaniel Hackett system, right? And the way that Nathaniel Hackett does things with running backs, he's always had these split committees. And I think obviously the signing of Dalvin Cook seems to ensure that. And the recovery of Breece Hall seems to ensure that. And this is something I talked about with Dave a few episodes ago, where last season, the lowest amount of touches by a top 12 running back was Tony Pollard with 230. So, kind of what you're talking about here is if Breece Hall is going to pay off the draft cost that he's got right here, he's got to have a lot of touches. And mind you, Tony Pollard with his 230 touches, the only reason he was a top 12 running back is because he had 12 touchdowns. So there's a lot of things in terms of volume, in terms of touchdowns, in terms of how those touches are coming. It's got to be in the passing game where the addition of Dalvin Cook, the addition of Aaron Rodgers, a lot of these things just start to spell that touchdowns might go elsewhere and the touches themselves might go elsewhere. So, yeah, I think that, listen, from everything you're saying, it seems like we could be all wheels up for Breece Hall next season, but not quite there in 2023. Let's talk about another guy who we've just been waiting for, that we have been wanting him to finally take off. And I think that the hearts of Broncos fans and fantasy football managers everywhere just collectively broke at the same time, because Jerry Jeudy now has another injury. And he's been coming off the board, according to Football Guys ADP, as pick number 50, wide receiver 23. And listen, for myself and for a lot of other analysts in the industry, he's been seen as the breakout guy, like one of the main breakout wide receivers for this season. And now he's got an injury.
Redraft home leagues where you're trying to get off to a fast start. You're trying to get in first place. You're trying to have good players on your team so you have some trade assets. I mean, some of these redraft leagues, most of them, honestly, shallower benches, it's hard to carry a guy if he's really dragging those first 4 to 5 of the season. Cooper Kupp, average time missed for a wide receiver with a hamstring strain, about 2.5 weeks. But for at least 20% of that sample that I've looked at, which includes over 108 players from 2017, 2022, 20% of them missed 5 weeks or more. Those are more serious hamstring strains. So hamstring strains are graded on a 3-point scale. 1 is minor, 2 is moderate, 3 is probably need surgery. I think read some of the tea leaves here. Again, I didn't diagnose Jerry Jeudy. I haven't put my hands on Jerry Jeudy, but I'm just trying to pick out some of the tea leaves here. It sounds like it was a more serious hamstring strain. Ian Rappaport reported it was a moderate hamstring, and Jerry Jeudy was expected to miss an extended time. needed to be helped to a cart and then kind of carted off. He wasn't carted off. He was able to stand up, but somebody needed to help him to that cart from based on some of the reports and tweets that we saw after that injury. This feels like a hamstring strain. This feels like an injury that, looking at that data, Jerry Jeudy falls in that 20% bucket where he will likely miss 5 to 8 weeks. And that's somebody, when we talk about his, using football guys aggregate ADP, pick 50, receiver 23 off the board. That's somebody that you're drafted to. If you're a heavy wide receiver build, that's your wide receiver 2. Or if you went with a heavy RB build, that's your wide receiver 1. And if you're not going to have him for 4 weeks of the season, that's going to put you in a hole. So I'm off at that ADP. I'd much rather prefer other guys going in that range.
When you say 8 weeks, that is honestly just terrifying. And especially with how some of these soft tissue injuries linger. I mean, we saw it specifically with Jeudy, was it 2 years ago with the high ankle sprain, where we thought, like, I think that what happens, and I mention this all the time, and I sound probably a little ignorant when I say it, but I think that fantasy football managers just sort of get into that Madden game mindset where they're like, oh, okay, 8 weeks. That means that he'll be back after 8 weeks and he's playing at 100%. That's how that works, right? No, like, think about yourself. Whenever you get hurt, a doctor might tell you it's going to take X amount of time for you to heal. And then you're just like, gosh, it's been 6 months and the XYZ injury still hurts me. These guys are professional athletes having to go out there and do things that we can only dream of. So that is terrifying to think of Jerry Jeudy missing 8 weeks or dealing with this injury for 8 weeks and then potentially more. I will say this, and I messed up and didn't really get to talk about it as much as I wanted to on our last episode when we brought up Jerry Jeudy. Marvin Mims is a guy that I am targeting heavily. I have been targeting him heavily in drafts. Adam, I'm not sure how you've been feeling about this Broncos wide receiver core. Courtland Sutton is a guy that I think is going to get steamed up quite a bit in ADP here as, the Jerry Jeudy news continues to funnel out. But Marvin Mims, because this is a team in the Broncos that everything could just go awful. I don't think Sean Payton really cares about Russell Wilson. And I think he'd be very, very willing to just be like, all right, let's trade Courtland Sutton away. Let's start to use some of these other guys. I can't even remember right now, the backup quarterback over there in Denver that they signed to replace Russell Wilson. But yeah, I'm worried that it could just turn into a big dumpster fire and it could be all in the rookies.
For sure. And I mean, to your point about Marvin Mims, if anybody's been following me on Twitter, I have been obnoxious and annoying about Marvin Mims. I am all in on the hype train. I'm in too many fantasy football leagues. I'm in like 23 fantasy football leagues. Marvin Mims rostership is over 55% on those teams.
All right, before we continue on here, I want to let you know, we've been talking about the ADP for these players and the rankings and all that stuff. Guess what? You can find all of that over on footballguys.com, where we have custom rankings that you can tailor to your league. Adam, you mentioned these leagues that you're in. I don't know how crazy they get, but man, like, we can supply rankings for whatever it is. You roster 4 wide receivers, 3, you got team quarterback, not just like the starter quarterback, team quarterback. We can do anything. We've got IDP rankings. We have so many different ways that you can customize these. Head on over to footballguys.com, or you can click the link in the description and become a Football Guys subscriber today. All right, Adam, we are talking about a guy here, running back, J.K. Dobbins, who was the talk of last season. First, he was injured. Then he said he's not injured. And then he said, I'm going to play week 1. And then he didn't play week 1. And then it was just up and down and up and down. And finally he gets in the field and he produces, but then he kind of doesn't look good. But at the same time, he does look good. I'm so confused with J.K. Dobbins. Please tell me there's some kind of good news here for this season after he tore his ACL in 2021.
That's when players start to bounce back. So we talk about attempts per game, fantasy points per game, receive efficiency, rushing efficiency. Those numbers start to level out to like pre-injury form. We saw that a little bit with J.K. Dobbins for the back half of last season. He finished strong. Currently, his Football Guys aggregate ADP is pick 54, RB 19. That's a perfect spot for him. I think he could easily outperform that RB2 ADP. Confidence in him, right? Not starting the season on a PUP, 100% cleared, wheels up for J.K. Dobbins.
Yeah, this is a guy who last season, it was kind of weird. It was up and down. I think we wanted to be a bit more excited about him. He only played about 7 games, but then there were a few games there where, he was still breaking runs. His gait, his running gait, and when we say that, we mean like the way that his legs were moving, opening, the way that the knee was bending. It didn't look quite natural. but he
Yeah.
was still able to run away from defenders while still not being very obviously not being at 100% health. Dave Kluge is going to love this portion of the podcast because J.K. Dobbins is one of his football guys' favorites, his favorite running back to draft this year. So I love it that we get the Adam Hutchison stamp of approval for J.K. Dobbins. Our next guy that we're going to talk about here is a player that I think has caused more fantasy headaches so far than championships. But I think there's a lot of people that still want to believe, and it's Kyle Pitts, tight end for the Atlanta Falcons, who right now he's coming off the board according to Football Guys ADP at pick 67 and as the tight end 7 off the board. Now, he had surgery on his MCL. He started camp wearing a brace. There was rumors that, oh, he looks a little clunky out there. He doesn't seem quite as fast as we remember him. Talk to me a little bit about Kyle Pitts here, because this is the guy that I think all the excitement from Dynasty spilled over into the redraft leagues, and all the people who have just been clamoring for a new tight end that's not named Travis Kelce or Mark Andrews have been wanting Kyle Pitts to finally produce. So talk to me about Kyle Pitts and this MCL injury.
Yeah. I mean, Kyle Pitts last season, he didn't even necessarily had like a full on MCL tear. He was going to try to play through it. And then later testing revealed that he actually did need surgery. As of today, August 29th with Tuesday, he is 9 months out. Typical return to play timeline for somebody coming off an MCL surgery is around 8 months. So he's a month out from that timeline. We saw a lot of camp video of him running straight line. People were getting a little bit nervous. MCL, I don't want to get too nerdy about the anatomy, but it's a ligament on the inside of the knee. It controls a lot of cutting and pivoting. We wanted to see some more of that lateral movement for Kyle Pitts. Twitter freaked out. Next day, another video comes out. He's cutting, pivoting all over the place. He looks good. Kyle Pitts, the biggest thing, again, we talked about this with Jake Dobbins. What is the team doing? They're camp on the PUP. He's going to be active week 1. He's clearly ready. Kyle Pitts is someone that I think you can confidently draft in that tight end, kind of mid-tier. I know there's a lot of debate, TJ Hawkinson, Dallas Goedert, Darren Waller. I think Kyle Pitts is that conversation.
Well, this has been awesome. Adam, thank you so much for joining us. And you're going to keep joining us every Sunday before the games start to let all of our audience members know and our Football Guy subscribers know if their players are going to be ready to play on Sunday mornings. It's going to be great to have you here as part of the team this season. Our bounce back players, and we're going to actually talk about it in just a minute. We're going to talk about some later round players that could make or break your fantasy season. These are guys that are also bouncing back. We got 3 players. Okay. 3 players that we're talking about: a running back, a quarterback, a wide receiver. I hope I teased you enough a little bit here, okay? And Adam's got some good news on a couple of them and some not so good news maybe on another one. But if you want to get that information, head on over to the audio version of this podcast. You'll find that link in the description down below, where we're going to talk about 3 more players, okay? This has been our bounce back players for 2023 with special guest Adam Hutchison. Thank you so much for watching.